Can you hear way back there? Way back there, I guess. Okay. To start with, Marilyn Burke, one of our original members, is going to make a little speech about maybe speeding up the food process here. So you can see what people think.
When we started out, we had like 5 people, and then 20, and then 40, and now we have 120. And 120 of you, or most of you, come at noon and expect to eat all at the one time, and we just can't do that. We have 2 waitresses who are keeping up great, except we only have 2 cooks in the kitchen because the kitchen's small. So my suggestion is, if you're interested, that we have either a limited buffet, or we have something like salad and pizza, soup and salad, or something like that, where you go through and serve yourself, and would be all one price. Does anybody object to that? Would the people still eat? I mean, would it be a benefit to the club to do that? So let's see a show of hands.
Yeah,
I gotta know that people are really interested in doing that.
Stromboli's over.
Stromboli's. Well, pizza might be good enough.
No, Stromboli.
Okay. Well, we'll see. I'll talk to Mike and we'll see what we can do the next time you come. It maybe because we'll do different.
Would we still be able to order out?
Thanks, Marlon. Okay, to begin with, we have a couple of announcements. One by Danielle about the calendars, bicentennial calendars, I think.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Danielle Bell, and one of the hats that I wear is to serve on the Monroe County Bicentennial Planning Team. If you haven't gotten the memo, this is the bicentennial year for the county and all of the communities within the county. And we are selling as a fundraiser the proceeds of this bicentennial calendar. The benefits is the restoration of the Alexander Memorial on the courthouse square. So all the proceeds, the purchase of this calendar, $15, goes to the Alexander Memorial, and we are accepting donations above the $15 if anyone feels so moved. But I'd be happy to take cash. I do have change or checks made out to Visit Bloomington. They're helping us with the sales. We also have events coming up. April 10th is the first commissioners meeting. The bicentennial team is planning something for that date in the evening, and we have June 22nd, various anniversary dates. But this calendar is really great because not only are there historic photos, courtesy of the Monroe County History Center and others that have worked on it, Christine as well, but during the year you will see various dates where there's anniversaries of things that occurred throughout the county. So it's a lot of fun to follow along. Even if you already have a calendar, this is a great little memento. So I'd be happy to put one in your hands, or more than one. So feel free to track me down. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Danielle. And then Randy Richardson had something she'd like to say.
Thank you, Mike. I don't know, how many of you are subscribers to the Monroe County History Center Library blog? Not very many. How many of you know about the blog? Not very many. I want to tell you a little bit about the blog, and I'm going to pass around some information today so you can see how to become a subscriber. In the past, they didn't have much material and they were not sharing on the blog routinely, but our librarian over here has assured me, as if she has enough material, and I'll see that she does, that she will be sharing weekly. So I want to tell you that some of the upcoming things that you can read about on the blog: the Pioneer Fire Company was established. Monroe County's first deed was recorded in Orange County. About the Monroe County man who lost his life on the Titanic. The Whitecappers, also called regulators, they were established to deal with lawbreakers. The establishment of Chapel Hill in Polk Township, a description of the history of the Howe Maxwell home. Essentially, the items on this blog are about people, places, and events of Monroe County historical events. So right now there are only 84 subscribers on the blog, and you can go in and search for past blog entries with a keyword. So I hope you will all do that. And there's also information on here about an upcoming program in Owen County, and this will be presented by a Monroe County native, Kurt Sylvester. Thank you, Mike.
Now, it so happens this is our 5th anniversary. So February 2013, 6 of us met down the basement of the library in a small room. Myself, George, Donna Stockstill, Skip Chambers, Shelby Kaiser, and Sarah Robertson. And then the next month we met in the blue room back there, not a very big room. There were like 12 people. And then it grew to like 18. Then we went to the sunroom over there for a couple of meetings and eventually ended up right here. And now we're having crowds of like 100 as an average, which is kind of amazing. So we're grateful for that. And actually that first meeting was facilitated by Christine Friesel right here. And I remember when she wanted me to make a title for the name of the group. And I put Bloomington History Club, and then I thought about it. I thought, no, it should be the whole county, so I crossed that out and put Monroe County History Club, so we just ended up with that.
I'll tell you the truth. So Mike and his Skip and others were just too loud in the Indiana room, and so I had to tell them to go get a room.
All right, so we got a room. So there we go. So we've had a lot of great programs, a lot of great speakers. This loyal following is just amazing. The people with a passion for local history. I think that interest for things related to local history was always here, but we just didn't know about it. So what we did was kind of accidental, really, which makes it probably all the more satisfying. And then the arrival of Cats TV helped us even more. So thanks a lot to those guys. And now George has a couple of things to mention. Minister of Propaganda.
Thank you, Mine Chancellor. I guess it's happy birthday to us today. Would like to draw particular attention to Shelby Kaiser, who is responsible. Yes, Shelby, please stand up. Shelby's really responsible as one of the founders of the group of our being at the Legion. And I said, how'd that go down? She said, well, we can't meet in this library basement anymore. And it just wasn't going to work. So where are we going to go? She says, well, let's go to Legion. She says, I'll talk to Bubba about it. I said, who's Bubba? And she says, Mike Pate. And so anyway, here we are. It's happy birthday to us. And it occurred to me the other day that in the process of our looking and doing history here, we're making history here too. By the fact that we got the people from CATS that are continuing what it is we're doing, what has already been done. Thank you very much for coming. I'd like to thank the Legion and always Loretta and the other hosts we have here. And I'd like to thank CATS, as ever, for doing this. How many of you have ever seen our presentations on YouTube? Good. Now, all of you who raised your hands, how many of you have subscribed to our YouTube channel? That's important. That's important because that automatically notifies you that when I put something new on there, and I do about once a month, put the most recent presentation. So if it's sometime you can't come and we have a presentation, you can get on there and the quality of the video is excellent and the sound is excellent. So it kind of takes some of the slack out of having to miss a presentation. Anything from you folks for the good of the cause? Well, then happy birthday to us.
Thanks, George. And actually, it was Shelby, after about our third or fourth meeting when we just talked to each other, she said, why don't we get an itinerary, Mike? And I thought, what's that, you know? She said, like speakers and things like that, so that's where all that started. So thanks, Shelby, for that. We've got a lot of meetings coming up, a lot of programs that are really good, booked almost a year ahead in a way. Like next year, we've got Dan Combs talking about the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918. April, Gib Apple, who was in management at RCA, is going to give a program on the history of RCA. Clay Stuckey, one of our frequent speakers, is going to give a detailed history on the history of West Baden Springs Hotel. Bob Hamill will be back to talk about the new members of the Monroe County Sports Hall of Fame. July, Brad Cook of IU Photo Archives will be back to finish his program on the history of IU. In August, David Nord will give a presentation on the history of Spring Mill State Park. September, Susan Dyer, the director of the Monroe County History Center, will talk specifically about the RCA Navy Defense F Flag Award for wartime production, the story of that. And then that takes us to October. Carrie Beam of the Wiley House is going to come and talk to you about that, where she works at the Wiley House. November's open, December's open, January. Professor Emeritus James Madison of IU will give a program probably on the Bicentennial of Monroe County. So we're booked with a lot of talented people. Now today we've got Christine Friesel. There's the name of her program. Don't need to say anything about that. So here we go.
Hi, everyone. I mentioned last time that I'm going to go through the 40s very fast, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to read a lot in order to do that. The reason I picked the 40s is just the same reason in my household, in my culture. We don't clean the house until somebody decides to have a party. So I said, I don't have anything for the 1940s. And so I said, well, I could always plan to give a talk about the 1940s, and then I would typically 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 hours before the presentation say what I say when I'm cleaning my house. Whose idea was this? So I threw a lot of things into the 1940s. I said, we're going to do it. We're just going to find out where our gaps are. We're going to be embarrassed about it. And we're going to find out, hopefully, some volunteers will come from the meeting today to say, I will index April of 1944 because you have nothing from April of 1944. The timeline is an interesting project because we said we'll get the community to add content of the historical and significant and maybe not so much significant events, and we'll put it all into the timeline. But the problem was we had no index to events before 1970. So that's a quandary. You say, well, somebody ought to index horses or soccer or golf before 1970. And I'm like, go for it. And they would say, how do I do that? And I'm like, I think you got to load the microfilm and read the microfilm, which is it's not fun. Although we have some nerds in here who do that, Mike Carter. So I'm going to go through the 1940s in a flash, and I'm hoping that if there's a significant event that we do not have up here, this is not everything we have on the Monroe County timeline. I'm hoping you'll write it down and just hand it off to me and say, you don't have anything about this business or this event. So first of all, I need to say thank you. The photos that I'm using in this presentation come primarily from IU Photo Archives. They pulled these photos from the back of yearbooks, from city directory phone ads, and of course their own photo collection. I need to say IU Libraries is partner with the Monroe County Timeline as well as with Monroe County Public Library, of course. Also, thank you to the Monroe County History Center. Just remind you that the Monroe County Timeline is an index. It's not a narrative, and it doesn't transform you like the History Center can. So, you know, it's easy for me to look up a fact and hand it off, but what they do at the History Center is they really transform you. They transport you back in time with objects and artwork and stories and put it in context. And so the people out there are phenomenal. So thank you to the History Center. Thank you to the Monroe County indexers and researchers. Some of these are work study students that you were only with me for a semester, but they're conscientious and disciplined kids, and I really appreciate them. The Herald Times and all the other newspapers that provided the content to help us find out. We read the newspapers, we replicated what the newspaper said, and we put it in there. So you can think of us as regurgitating or replicating, or just we're just a mirror of what the newspaper reported. But the newspaper was there, so we thank them. The Friends of the Library have helped me promote the timeline. And of course, we have active and maybe less active now local historians, including Randy Richardson, Bill Coulter, those who have established Roots Web, if you've ever taken a look at that. We also have those who have passed on, like Carol Krause, who wrote the Showers Brothers history, and Rose McElveen. Anybody show hands who has known Rose McElveen personally? Her father carved the Alexander War Memorial on the courthouse lawn. Rose McElveen is, she would do those looking back articles in the Herald Times. And she would just go to the basement of the newspaper, open up, and I think she had an affection for true crime, because some of what she wrote about, the crime, we have it in the timeline because she did that. So thank you, and thank you, Mike, for inviting me. And the Monroe County Timeline, I'm not going to show you to you on this presentation, but it is the authoritative and popular index of historical and curiously interesting events. It's made possible by the community. It's created in partnership, like I said, with IU Libraries, the History Center, and the Public Library. And as I said before, we are just replicating what we find. Sometimes we don't go looking for something. And we focused on events prior to 1970. And one of the reasons we did this as a partnership, we said, you know, we really want to go after crime. We really want to go after political stuff. And if we get too close to the modern day, you know, it's really interesting when your great uncle Tex gets arrested, but it's not so interesting if it's your brother-in-law who's sleeping on your sofa right this minute. So we wanted to avoid some of the stuff that might be fresh, especially for covering crime. We really don't want to be, we don't need to do that because the Herald Times has an index. The public library has access to that as well, going back to 1988. So 1970 is when the Monroe County Public Library got the Indiana room. So that's when we started clipping the newspaper articles, 1968, 1970. So we have somewhat of an index, but our weakness was right before 1970. Anyway, keep in mind that if we follow the business model of media way back when, and if it bleeds, it leads, and the colored news section is on page 7 at the bottom left, if we're just replicating what the newspaper did, then so be it. We are just doing exactly, we're just repeating history. But of course, we built a timeline so that perhaps there could be some fresh narratives. Maybe we can identify some people in our history that never got enough praise or recognition. But for my purpose today, I'm just going through the 1940s very quickly, just highlighting the events. What I really want you to pay attention to is what's not in the timeline. And if you weren't here in the 1940s, I know you brides were probably not born until after the 1940s. But if you see something, let me know. And the reason I'm doing this is so that we can just hurry up and get this decade saturated with more information. Bill McDonald of the Limestone historian said that the folks who worked in limestone were so busy working, they never took photographs of themselves as workers. And that's just so true. You can think about the 1940s and the Depression. You were just so busy working. You think about the guys all went off to war, the women went to work. Who was taking care of the kids? Who was sleep deprived? Do you think people were sleep deprived in the 1940s? I'll talk about the sleep deprivation as we go through here. But when you are in crisis and you are in war and you are really, really busy, you are not taking a selfie. So think about that as we are looking for photos of the 1940s as well. Considering, when you think of things that we are missing, keep in mind that we need to know, we need to have a source citation for that. So there's a reference to an interview with George Taliaferro, I think. No, it's somebody else. I can't remember who it is. African-American gentleman who worked for the city, and he said race relations in Monroe County, in Bloomington, really started to turn the corner in 1948. And I'm like, what was so different in 1948? And so, of course, he's not going to tell me. He says that's just about when it happens. So I just want to give you this as an example. Sometimes when we change our ways in Monroe County or in our past, these are private conversations. If you decided no longer to drink, you're not going to put that maybe in your scrapbook, right? You're just going to have that conversation between you and your pastor or you and your mother for the last time. This is a private conversation. So these private conversations about how Bloomington changed, I don't know if they're going to be documented, except maybe after that person has lived quite a long way. So did race relations change because Herman B. Wells picked up the phone and he called the owner of a restaurant? And is he going to detail what they talked about? So I just want to give you this example as to what the newspaper is writing about, and I'm going to jump ahead to 1950. So I know we're going to start at 1940, but this is what the newspaper wrote in 1950. This is May 14. The mass closing of local restaurants takes Bloomington residents by surprise. The closing was explained by a spokesman who said certain Bloomington restaurants have closed their places of business in interest of public safety for an indefinite period of time as the result of an organized effort on the part of a group of individuals to force their parsonage on restaurants which are located in the business district of the city. Who? What? When? Who was talking? Spokesman. So the local newspaper is saying something is going on, but we're not going to mention anything because it could be one of our advertisers, our community leaders. It's a cousin, it's a brother, it's my neighbor. But this is how vague they are in 1950. So with that in mind, let's go through the 40s. In 1940, IU has 46 buildings, 190 acres. Census counts 20,870 people living in Bloomington. But the thing that I wanted to point out that's the big event for 1940 was a rabbi's wife, May Clements Purley, publishes a book. She's a New Yorker. She's coming to Bloomington. She's Jewish in 1940. And she's writing a book called Without My Gloves. She's without her gloves. The book depicts the experiences of coming to America and living in Bloomington, which she refers to as Doomington. The book depicts Bloomington and its small town ways and ridicule and condescension. So without my gloves, she's saying in 1940, oh my goodness, this is not high class. And she's right. I think they moved shortly after that. In 1940, September 13, the State Teachers Association reports that the cost of operating schools in Monroe County are the lowest in the state. This is a picture of the school board. This is Helen Baker, Mr. Havens, and Woodward. Yeah, we don't pay our teachers at all. Go, yay. 1940, Herman B. Wells becomes president of IU in 1938. IU Herman B. Wells does a tremendous amount, of course, for IU during the 40s. Just keep in mind that he is, in 1940, a member of the Federal Savings and Loans Advisory Council. He has some national prominence. He's gradually working his way up on the national radar. And here's an example of what he's doing for our campus. He's bringing people like Dr. Maines on the right here. Dr. Maines was a prominent figure in insurance science. Now I'm thinking, if you are starting a big university and you want to grow your university, what better friend than to have the expert in risk management, really? But he is German-born, and he taught in Berlin, and but due to being Jewish, he decided to get out. The Nazi Party took control over Germany. He left, and now he's teaching at IU. So keep that in mind as to what Herman B. Wells, where his mind is as he's building IU. Also in 1940, in the spring, Mary Waldron is cooking for her son, Charles. They're at this house on South Rogers Street. The old firehouse, which is now Lotus, is over to the north of this. Does anyone see this house? She's cooking dinner, and her apron catches on fire, and she knows what's happened. She's got third-degree burns, and she's thinking, really, I've done so much for this community, right? And then we'll talk about how wonderful Mary Waldron was, but she goes up in flames, and she gets in the hospital, and she's like, yeah, what an idiot. I'm sure that's weren't her words, but she said, I shouldn't have been cooking with my apron near an open flame. But that's how we don't get to decide, apparently, how we go. But I want to talk about Mary Waldron, because this is important about our social services and how we took care of our poor in the 40s. She married John Waldron's son. And shortly after, when her son was 2 years old, I think, he died. And she raised her boy in Bloomington. And she went on to get several degrees. I think Susan Armany, who knows about Mary Waldron probably the most in Monroe County, has said when Charles, her son, went to law school, she said, I want to go too, Charles. He's like, great, Mom. Great. So she went to law school. She is our first Monroe County attorney. She has her PhD and, of course, her master's in social work. And she got an office in City Hall. In fact, I think Mary Waldron got whatever she wanted. She was one of those people that when you wanted something to get done, you went to go see her, and she would march quite militantly to get it done. She's also one of those people that if you saw her coming your way, you might cross the street. I don't think he refused Mary Waldron, but she did refuse. She refused to get paid for her work. So it was pretty remarkable. And another thing about Mary Waldron is that she helped bring the Sisters of Providence to start Catholic school in 1922. So she was the person who did it. She said to IU, President Bryan, we need to get those nuns from St. Mary's of Wood, Sisters of Providence. We need to get them over to IU. And in 1922 was not a friendly place. Remember, the KKK was here. They weren't too happy with Catholics. Mary Waldron made sure that they had a safe place, and so they could start their school. President Bryan actually escorted the nuns. These were the nuns in the old habits where you couldn't have peripheral vision. He escorted the nuns across campus, and she was there pushing him. And I don't think he would ever say no to her. Also in 1940, so she dies in April. In November, the school principal of Central School, Frank Templeton, tells the 200 community chest members. The community chest is the precursor to United Way, that there are more than 100 undernourished children in the school system, and that they really need to bump it up to help the poor. Of course, this is in the thick of the Depression. And then by November, there's a possibility of forming a prominent council of social agencies. So Mary Waldron, this one power horse, dies in April, and by November, they're thinking, we can't replicate what she does because we want to get paid. So they decide to form a council of social agencies. Also in November, the city council increases the fees if you are caught begging or peddling or soliciting on the streets. So that's another sign. In 1940, in February, RCA comes and purchases the Showers plant on South Rogers, And it says it plans to employ between 600 and 700. Of course, they're producing radios for the war effort, but by 1940 of that, by October of that year, they have manufactured over 100,000 radios, and they are employing about 546 people. A lot of people have asked me what happens to the Showers brothers during the 40s. We know a lot of this because of Carol Krause's research. In March of 1940, 1,200 workers, I've seen the data also saying 900 workers go on strike. They want more money. Guy Burnett says there's no way, we can't afford it. So he says we're just going to close shop until the strike comes to terms with the fact that this is the Depression. It's not good. People are not buying furniture. We can't give you a raise. And so the clergymen in Bloomington form a fact-finding committee. Can you imagine that today? If Cook Incorporated has a problem, the clergymen come together to have a fact-finding committee. So this strike starts on March the 3rd, or March the 11th. By March 22nd, it's reported that the retail sales downtown are really weak because of the strike. By March 27th, the fact-finding committee announces who's on the committee, including Dean of Education Henry Lester Smith, who's also a big historian from Monroe County, and a fellow by the name of Milo Curtis. 2 days later, Milo Curtis resigns from the committee. I want to know why. Maybe he just has another appointment. In April, they do attempt to settle the strike. They get the governor of Indiana to come down. Or no, they go up to Indianapolis to meet with the governor. Then the strikers hold another meeting in April. They come to an agreement the day after. And shortly after that, the last member of the pioneer family of the Showers, Earl H. Showers, dies of a heart disease after an illness of 6 weeks. So right when the strike comes, it goes downhill really fast. And that's my understanding of the Showers brother, is after the founding family pass on, they really hit hard times. Plus you add the war, plus you add the Depression, and they're really getting hit hard from all sides, the Showers brothers. Paul McNutt is a former governor and a high commissioner of the Philippines. He announces in 1940, this is October, a special agent will be sent to Bloomington to survey the possibility of establishing a national defense works in the area. Anybody? Crane, anybody? But this is, McNutt is a Bloomington boy. And I did not realize how important McNutt is. We'll talk about him later in the show. His wife is the daughter of the president of the Canto Wax Company. So I think his wife as well has long time.
Senator Jenner from Bedford, in the opposite wing of the party from, obviously the opposite party, always referred to the Bloomington McNutt as that flaxen-haired boy wonder.
McNutt was a Democrat. Jack Dempsey, the famous boxer, is the special guest of Frank Gentry. We'll talk about Frank Gentry. So he's here. Famous people coming into Bloomington, such as FDR Jr. He's on the top left over here. In January, Roosevelt approves a WPA project for the airport. Yay, we need an airport. Then in September, President Roosevelt grants a continuation of our county road program, which it should employ about 775 men. In October, the Evening World says, hey, FDR is coming. Now, this is an interesting thing. On October 17th, 1940, 10,000 people attend a Democratic rally at the high school gym. 10,000. What do you suppose the capacity of that school was in 1940? The gym was 4,500. So is this a typo, or did they stream in all day? Yeah, no fire code then. And they also, at this event where FDR was, they registered for the Selective Service about 5,300 men. FDR So FDR Jr. is coming to our high school gym, and the next day, President Roosevelt approves a 36,000 sewer project for Bloomington. Don't you just love that? The next day, wow, how did that happen? So coincidental. November 6th, just a few weeks later, Roosevelt wins his third term. Go Bloomington. Incidentally, Eleanor Roosevelt comes to Bloomington as well, but I don't think it's until the 50s. So IU cyclotron in 1940, April. This is the Indiana Daily Student is profiling, isn't this great? This particle accelerator is used during the war to conduct experiments for the Manhattan Project. Anybody knows the significance of this? The atomic bomb, perhaps? So you think of IU and Indiana as middle of the, we had some really smart people who were really secretly working on this and pulled away. These professors were pulled away for the Manhattan Project and brought back to us. And they improved the cyclotron over the years. I just realized I'm going to have to go a lot faster because I'm in only 1941. Okay, so when I talked about the woman, the Jewish woman who wrote it Without My Gloves and how popular she was after she called Bloomington Doomington, I want to just promote a theme here, which is the town and gown of the 40s. The 1941, the auditorium is built, and Herman B. Wells must have just been giddy, because now we are really going to start dressing up in Bloomington. We're going to start wearing gloves. The auditorium opens, and a journalist, I think it's with the local newspaper, that Herald Telephone, or, yeah. Journalist calls for inclusivity at the auditorium. J.W. Purcell Jr. publishes an article on the front page of the newspaper calling the newly built IU auditorium to be open to those who may not be able to afford tickets. The authors state, "It is a pipe dream, but I would like to see the auditorium filled some nights with Bloomington people who never have before sat in an IU building." So he's saying, let the people see the art, let the people see the performance. But the 1941s, and I'm going to look at the clock and really discipline myself and not talk too much about this, was pretty dominated by the events on July 5th, 1941, when Carolyn Payne, the right, of course she's on the right, this business circulation manager for the Herald Telephone, decides to put 6 bullets through her ex-lover. Can you imagine working with somebody at the newspaper and the next day writing about her? Well, I was just having lunch with her. So the story is in 1938 or 39, she and Mattingly, he's a lot younger than her. She's a divorced woman. She's prominent in Democratic politics. She was in the newspaper industry in Indianapolis. Her husband was prominent in Democratic leadership in Indianapolis. The story that Rose McElveen says is that when her husband started to lean a little bit towards the KKK, they split because she's not that way. So she's very good friends with McNutt, and Q. Austin East is another Democratic politician, lawyer. And she decides to take in this boarder, Charles Mattingly, and she says, look, you stay with me, kid. I'll get you some nice suits. We'll get you to some nice dinners. I'll show you the really important, powerful people. We'll get you your law degree. We'll get you there. We'll get you there. And so she's sort of like dressing him up like a Ken doll. And he's working really nice to please her because the money is just flowing his way, just right. But they get in an accident in 1938, 39. They get in a car accident. And I have to think to this day, if there had been airbags and seatbelts, we would not be here talking about this today because he comes out with a scratch, but she is really messed up. She's got a gash in her forehead, a broken jaw, teeth knocked out. She's got severe pain, and she goes into an insane asylum just for a little bit. But then she comes back, she starts working for the paper again. But he passes by her house, which is on North Lincoln. So he passes by her house with his pretty new project. And Carolyn Payne sees this project that he's working on, and he apparently is planning to marry her. And Carolyn does not like this and hunts him down on July 5th, 1941, and shoots him in this house, which is 2 houses south of Shalom Center on Walnut. Incidentally, this house used to be owned by John Mellencamp. Just if anyone's looking for some new material for John Mellencamp. Little gray houses, right. But this house is owned by the Candyman. Anyone knows who the Candyman is? Nikas? Okay. Yeah. So this is the Nikas house, and there's babies in here. And why is he called the Candyman? He owned this Indiana sweet shop next to the theater, Indiana Theater. So imagine this is going on in 1941, and everyone's going to the movies. Where are they going? Can you imagine the sweet shop? It must have been packed. What'd you see? What happened? Pretty sensational. So she gets arrested, and she doesn't say a word. She gets Q. Austin East, a Democratic prominent politician, I think he was a state legislator, to represent her, and she's going to plead she was insane. They did a trial, and on the trial, I thought was interesting, some of the jurors were listed, and I think the trial doesn't come till 42, so my notes say, don't give it away yet. Let's move on. Is there more 41? Nope, there's not. Okay, so we're going to stick with 42. So some of the early, in the trials in November of 42, and the prospective jurors, some of them are women, and one of them I thought was interesting for 1942 was African-American Elizabeth Bridgewaters was on that list, and I thought that was very interesting to me for 1942. I just would like to know when the first female juror pool started so that we know at least they were doing female jurors in 1942, probably before then too. After deliberating just 6 hours, the jury said manslaughter, voluntary manslaughter, 2 to 21 years. She serves about 2.5, and she's not well in the head, but she does come back to Bloomington. Can you imagine the courage? She comes back to Bloomington. She manages the hotel. I can't remember what the name of the National Hotel, maybe on Morton Street. Does that ring a bell to anybody? Lincoln Hotel. Well done. Yeah, so she does all right. But yeah, airbags and seatbelts are nice. Okay, so 1941, we get the auditorium. Who do we get? One of our first national performers is Marian Anderson. Most people know of her because the Daughters of the American Revolution refused to let her sing. Of course, they realized their error, and they brought her back to Constitution Hall several times after that. They were just mortified of their wrong choice. But who's one of the first people that Herman B. Wells says, I want her. I got a new auditorium. I want her to be one of my first stars. And he does just that. And he's just fascinating person. In July of 1942, the Harris Grand on 222 North Walnut Street burns. And I got this picture here. I never found a data point to put with it. So I don't know what happened, but I just love this picture. And this is, of course, one of the many IU photo archives photos of gathering of, in the 40s, downtown Bloomington.
I think it was a
War Bonds March. So how would we find that out? I'll tell you, they stopped publishing the city directories in the 1940s, during the war years. So if you wanted to know who owned that building in 1943, it would just be work at the recorder's office. I couldn't quickly find that out. So there's a couple things they did during the 40s they just stopped doing, and the city directors was one of them. Okay, next slide. In 1942, trees are planted. This is February at the site of Beck Chapel. So this is where a religious conference, of course, you know the war is going on, and three religious faiths, the Jewish folks, the Catholics, and the Protestants come together and they say, let's plant a tree and let's create a chapel. Let's non-denominational. Let's all get along, and so that's a big deal. Dr. Beck and his wife didn't get the chapel built till 1956, but they're planting trees in 1942. Okay, so the auditorium elevates us so that we're not so low class and we have a good time. We bring jazz. Here's Nelson Eddy. Tommy Dorsey's coming. We've got Carl Sandburg is coming to the auditorium in March. I really do think Herman B. Wells must have been making a list for years, like, I want to get these and I want to get this. Our first diesel engine comes to Bloomington. And this is in April. Among the crew of the train, Tom Lindsay, Glenn Chambers, Henry Lee, Terry Trowbridge, Ed Quarry, Ernest Nevins, Les Eddings, Raymond Newton, W.T. Cornwell, R.H. Osborne, and Levi Page, or Levy Page. I wanted to say something back here. I don't remember what it was. She's paroled in 44. And what's the next slide? What? No. She did not kill anybody else. But I don't think she had any roommates. I'll just tell you that. I think if you have that house on North Lincoln, wouldn't you want to know that? They said that Rose McElveen wrote about the day that she was arrested. She was playing on the street the day that Carolyn Payne was arrested. It's like, wow. That's pretty awesome. 1943. The V2 fuse. And I'm reading this, of course, because I'm not a science person. It's manufactured by RCA workers. It's first fired against a Japanese plane January 5th of 1943. So we've ramped it up quite a bit. And these are produced at the RCA factory in silence. Go ahead.
My mother back there worked on that fuse.
Oh, that's awesome. You're like a rock star. I wish I had your photo here instead of this. Does that bring goosebumps back to have you look at that? Sarkis Tarzian invented this fuse. Now that I don't think is in the timeline, so that's good to know. Top secret, yeah. Back then yeah. People kept secrets back then. It's all out. I will. So this is January 1943. We're first using the fuse, and we're doing damage, and it's doing awesome work. It's no bigger than a pint-sized milk bottle. Has 5/8 of an inch by 3/8 of an inch glass tube that explodes when it comes close enough to its target to inflict damage. Women have little hands, and I think this was good work. This is a shot from a 1943 high school yearbook. I went to the yearbook to find out what the kids were learning. New trades are being taught during the war. So pre-flight aeronautics, radio, Pan-American relations are added to the curriculum. Home economics took a health class for undernourished students. We're still into depression. With girls learning to make victory gardens and boys learning nutrition. I'm sure they loved that. The industrial department, well, think about it. If their mothers are working at RCA, the boys need to take care of themselves and learn nutrition. So I can understand that. Then the industrial department taught classes. This is from the yearbook. From 4 a.m. until 12 midnight on blueprint reading, machine tool operation, welding, drafting, and precision instrument reading. Now, I can't imagine you sending your kid to a class at 4 a.m., but if they went to high school and they worked, and you wanted to get ahead and you wanted to learn blueprint reading, and that was the only time you could get a class, you might be highly motivated to do that.
That's at the high school football field. Yeah.
Gary, am I pronouncing this right? Keisters? Kisters, thank you. Jerry. Gary. Okay, we have a battle. Okay. George?
Yes, it's Gary.
It's Gary. All right, well done. See, thank you very much. So this is in July of 1943. He becomes the first serviceman to receive both the Congressional Medal of Honor and Distinguished Service Cross for his war service. Army Sergeant Keisters and his Kisters and detachment start across taking enemy fire near Gagliano, Sicily. He and other officers capture one of 2 machine gun entanglements and its crew of 4 at a strategic route forward. He then advances on his own toward the 2nd machine gun and captures it. It's pretty fascinating. In the process, he was struck 5 times by enemy bullets. Both of his legs are damaged and his right arm, and the airport is named in his honor. Jumping back in time, 1943 is when our last Civil War vet dies. And you think, what does this have to do with the 40s? But I just will say, it's not until the 1956 that the courthouse, the commissioners tell the Grand Army of the Republic. And you're thinking, who are they talking to? The children, right? The children of the Civil War vets. The commissioners in 1956 tell the Grand Army of the Republic, you got to get out of the courthouse. And they get Byron Curry, an attorney. No, Byron Curry reports that his attorney advises him to fight it. We're not going. So I was to say, even though the last Civil War vet dies in 1943, I was often dismissing this organization because, oh, by the 20s, the Civil War vets are dead, and there's not a lot of activity to honor the Civil War vets. But the children were still kicking in 1950 saying, we're not leaving the courthouse. The reason the courthouse said you had to get out was because they were bringing in the Department of Public Welfare. So think back to Mary Walden leaving or dying, and the committee to save, to produce more organized welfare department. That's why the Grand Army of the Republic had to get out.
I believe my father was one of the county commissioners who kicked them out.
Well done. So is that true? Did they have to go because of the welfare?
That I did not know.
I also read that they had to get them out because they had to make room for accommodating women jurors. And so I thought they didn't have women jurors until the 50s, but I think they needed a women's restroom and facilities in the 50s. I think they just tried to do anything to get them out. This is a photo of Richard Peden. In my November of 1943, the Soil Conservation District is founded. Now, he's not one of the, he's not on the governing committee, but I do know from our Soil and Water District staff, Marcia Miller, that Richard Peden was phenomenally significant in the establishment of the Soil and Water District. And I didn't have a photo of the other guys, but I had this wonderful photo of Richard Peden. So these are conversations that start at the kitchen table and the farm table between all the chores and working hard all day, and then they say, okay, let's start the conservation district. So that's that. This is a photo of hundreds of IU students at Crane Naval Depot in 1944. The bus picks them up and takes them to Crane, and they, what did you do last weekend, honey, at IU? Well, Mom, I went to Crane and I sorted and refilled ammunition shells. In 1943, the state legislature lets it be okay for third-class cities like Bloomington to establish their own boards of aviation commission. And so Bloomington was the first one to do that, to say, okay, we're on it. So in 1944, the people who was part of the Airport Aviation Commission are Donald Hanson, E.B. Duane, Ben Rector, thank you, John Stemple.
That's Kister's Field.
This is the Bloomington Limestone Corporation. Anybody affiliated with this company or their father? Bloomington Limestone Company, like RCA, secretly converted their manufacturing mills to the war effort. They're making amphibious tank treads, among other things. And this is the Klein and Wiley mills that were transformed. They also won, like RCA, they won a Navy, Army, Navy E for Excellent Award. And I'll show you that ceremony later. This is Charles Weir, son of E.T., I think it's Edwin, and Grace Weir. He grew up at the Weir Funeral Home at 403 West Kirkwood. Does anyone know where that is? The Batman house, Garrett Antiques, is that right? Yep. He grew up, this is very interesting to me, as a mother who has boys. He grew up surrounded by dead people, right, at the funeral home. And this kid gets his pilot wings in 1944 at the Army Air Corps. In 1949, he was the first helicopter pilot to perform an air rescue mission north of the Arctic Circle. He was awarded Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal, and 2 clusters, and Korean Service Medal with 3 battle stars while serving the 3rd Air Rescue Squadron, the most decorated squadron in the Korean War. He was later a cartoonist, a successful cartoonist, and he grew up in a funeral home. So whenever your teenager complains that there's nothing to do, I think he grew up with a bunch of dead people in his basement, and he did just fine. 1945. A federal grant lets us add on to the hospital. I don't know how many beds it gets us, but we do add on to the hospital. This is the time where Orville Green and Robert Harrell are combining their businesses. Green is previously working with the Allen Funeral Home, but he goes off on his own, and Green and Harrell form the funeral home at the, this is of course on Kirkwood. In 1945, the Bloomington Limestone Company receives their military flag, the Army Navy E Award. And this ceremony is held in the high school gym. And I think these photos, we actually found these photos when we did a limestone heritage digitization project. Bloomington Limestone Corporation took a photo of the mill before and after the conversion. And I kept on thinking, what are they doing? This looks nothing like limestone. Of course, my ignorance, I didn't know. But the photos of the high school gym, they're great. And I'm thinking, did we really take photos of the high school gym? Are we taking good enough photos of the high school gym now? But these are really interesting photos. And we have high quality photos of the gym, of these at the public library's website. So you can really drill down far. In June of 1945, Taliaferro comes on a bus from Gary, Indiana. He's dropped off at 10th and Walnut Street, and then he walks over to 8th and Dunn Street, where he is boarding. This is the only place for blacks to live on campus. Well, it's actually not on campus. He's off campus because blacks can't live on campus. Guess what else you can't do if you're an African American in 1946? You can't eat on campus. So here's this guy who has to do his homework. He has to make it to practice. He probably has the job. He probably has to work. And he can't eat on campus. So he said he would run from campus, from the stadium or wherever his practice field, and he'd run back to this place at 8th and Dunn and inhale his food, and then he would run back to class. So as we're talking about the 1940s, and after 1946, this kid is and other African Americans are running across campus just trying to get something to eat and then get back because they can't eat in a restaurant or on campus. In 1945, this is July. On the left is an advertisement out of the phone book for Kelly's Cafe. The Office of Price Administration, the OPA, determines that the owner, Emmett Kelly, who later decides to run for mayor, I don't know if this is why, is determined that he's in violation of his red rations. The district ration banking officer, man, wouldn't you just love to have one of those in your family? I am the district ration banking officer. And he states that the restaurant owner, Emmett Kelly, has overdrawn his account by 18,000 points. Kelly was told that too many satisfied customers is the validation that Kelly is not operating within his allowance. After 15 years, the restaurant closes. So this is in July of 1945, after the war. Kelly is told that he basically says, I can't operate with these rules, and I'm folding. And then in 1946, Bender opens up the shop, his restaurant in that same place. And the Benders that are opening up that, Bender brothers, Eugene, Lester, and Dwight, which I believe are the same Bender lumber family. And this restaurant is located at 110 South College Avenue. So that, I think, is in the alley by where the Bikesmiths is right now on South College and the bank. On the other side of the street? Okay. Where maybe Lung Chung restaurant used to be? Okay, so the building's probably not there. Oh, it's there? Is it where McRae is? Okay, I'll have to figure this out. Okay. Well, I'm going to find out where this is. But anyway, eventually Kelly runs for mayor, to become mayor. He's not too happy. 1945, the city celebrates VE, Victory in Europe Day. And I just thought I would read to you what the newspaper, the World Telephone, writes about this. They're dancing in the streets, of course. Having become accustomed to shadow-shaded surroundings on the square during brownout nights, local residents all but needed sunglasses last night as the brownout was abolished by flashing, winking, and rippling gleams of display lights. So people, of course, were in the streets and running to the square where they celebrated the end of that part of the war. In August 15th, 1945, when Japanese surrender, Taliaferro remembers sitting on the steps of his boarding house, and this is a photo of the house. I assume those steps were still there in 1945, and then he remembers learning about the Japanese surrender when he was outside this house. His biography is very interesting by Don Knight. He says that he could not even get a haircut at Mr. Shante's barbershop. Even though Mr. Shante was an African American, he couldn't get his haircut there. He had to wait to do it at his home. He has to ask the barber, can I get my haircut at your home later, because we couldn't come into the shop. So that's where we were in 1945. Again, I'm bringing up the fuse because in September of 1945, it is revealed that this fuse was tremendously important in the war effort. It is described as the second only to the atomic bomb as technologically important to the war effort. And I'm fascinated by that 85% of the workers were women. And so it is... It just had to get near it, yes. And we were quiet about the whole thing while we were doing it. 1946, this is the year that Rogers opens up block manufacturing, and the Weddell Brothers is established. Lots of things happen, of course, when the boys come home, right? Babies get born. In 1946, the two bodies are discovered at the Hunter Brothers Mill. Thanks to Clay for giving me this story. Is this the one? You know, when I was researching this, I found discrepancies with the ages of these victims, but I don't know if that's really that important. Russell Coons was married to another woman, and Phyllis Coleman was married to another man. They met at the church choir, and they were not working on limestone at the mill. There was an automobile accident nearby, and a black man who I think had some affiliation with the car accident. I don't know what. Maybe he was just passing by, or maybe he was involved in the car accident. But he stumbled across. He confesses to the killings. He states that he caught Mr. Coons and Ms. Coleman in a compromising position, and Mr. Coons, I don't know why, but he freaked out and he attacked the African American. And then in his defense, he hit Mr. Coons over the head, and then in a panic, he strangled Mrs. Coleman. Very sad. And what's probably saddest about the whole thing is at the funeral, the newspaper is trying to get a photo of Mr. Coons' wife. He's trying to get, the photojournalist is trying to get a photo of this, and so her brother knocks them out. Now, there's a part of me that just finds that very satisfying. But he is charged with assault, so it's just a horrible, horrible event. I have this, I sometimes make, I spend my day on facts, right? So every once in a while, I just, like a recess, I just need to make up things. So I just make up the fact that after the war, after the Depression, after the war, after women being out of the home and the family being stressed out and the rationing, and you couldn't buy anything, you couldn't get anywhere, and your sons are gone and maybe not coming back, but after the war, when things like this happen, murders and crime, I think it's sad, but it's like there's so much more to do, to build. And so you will see here after the war, of course, you know what's going to happen. We're just going to grow really fast. So in my fantasy island mind, I think after the Depression, people were just like, okay, bad things happen, but this is great. Our boys are back, and we're pregnant again and again and again and again. So I think that's what I'm thinking, is that after the war, this town really takes off. One thing in May of 1946, Memorial Day, it's reported, the chairman of the Memorial Day Program Committee says, we are out of flags. Can't find them. This country, there's a famine on flags. We're just plumb run out of them. 1946, the day after Memorial Day, the city of Bloomington says, we should install parking meters. In 1946, May, right around this time, this is the AME Bethel Church, and the fella in the middle is who I want to talk about. In May of 1946, he is shown here, Maurice Evans in the middle. He is affiliated with the AME Bethel, AME Church Brotherhood, and he decides to set up a Boy Scout troop just for black boys. And this is the first and only one in a 9-county civil district. So Bloomington is progressive, and it has strong leaders. And but here's a guy who, of course, was educated at IU, and he's like, I am going to start a Boy Scout troop for the kids, and I think that's phenomenal. Matthews Brothers Stone Company is working in Cleveland, Ohio, and building the Case School for Applied Sciences. Bill Garrett is our first African-American basketball player at this time. He's the first African-American to play in the Big Ten. In 1947, Herman B. Wells is taking the governor and showing him the Wiley House, and he says, we need to purchase it for IU. And he agrees, so we start to take care of that house, as we should. 1947, I only have a picture of, this is what school is this? Templeton Middle School. Across the street at 1300 North Maple Street is a fire of the Maple Furniture Company and Quality Mills Company. I couldn't find much about them, but it sounds like it was a wholesale furniture manufacturer. They burnt. Maple, you had a question? Not Templeton. Try North? Yeah, try North, sorry. Okay. And in 1947, we've got a new newspaper, the Daily Herald. These are some photos of some journalists from the newspaper. I don't have a picture for housing problems in 1940. You can imagine, I think if you were around in the 1940s, you would remember the growth on campus was phenomenal. But 1947 is when the Board of Bloomington Realtors was established. So I think there's some, let's get together and organize so we can sell these houses in some ethical way, and so we can all get along. But I want to show you the picture of the Showers Brothers factory. So for the first time in 8 years, the Showers Factory Company earns some realistic numbers, $500,000. This is the first time they've hit this mark in 8 years. So they're on the, what we hope is the up. George Taliaferro in 1947 this is vague because I don't have the details, but he is influential in persuading the Gables restaurant to become racially integrated. Yeah?
Yeah, they wouldn't serve him, and he went to Dr. Wells. And Dr. Wells said either you serve him or it's going to be off limits to Indiana University students.
Did you hear that? The story is that Herman B. Wells heard a report from Taliaferro that probably was supported by Bo McMillan, the football coach. Herman B. Wells said that if Gables won't serve Taliaferro, then none of IU students will be going to the Gables. So just a little pressure. 1948, I don't have a picture of this, but the Homemakers Club of Monroe County wins the honor at this Indiana State Fair with an exhibit demonstrating the different types of baking made with wheat. The ration is over, and the product is called Miracles of Wheat. Does anyone know what that is? But they win. Our local girls are great. In 1948, Bloomington has their first bar mitzvah. This is a photo of Arthur Fell. And he looks right at the age. 1948, Lloyd Hopkins, a police officer, has provided some help with local history. And this is, he reports, this is, 1948 is the first time Bloomington has a record system at the police station, which includes a photograph and fingerprinting. So after the war, I could only assume that some of the guys are more disciplined, perhaps, and orderly. So the record system really gets organized after the war. Barbara Shalaka, an IU biology professor, establishes Hilltop Gardens. And she becomes a member of our county Hall of Fame in 2000. In 1948, the Pilgrim's Holiness Church opens. This is on 518 West 4th Street. The church is later becomes Central Wesleyan Church. Also in 1948, in January, on January 5th, Kinsey Reports comes out. His book is called Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. You know, one thing I didn't talk about the war is I did read up on what Indiana was like during the war and where our politicians were going with the war and how certain sectors of our community, or of our state, really competed well for contracts, government contracts. Showers was making government desks, and of course Crane. But one of the things that they talked about was how little Indiana did to protect their boys from VD. and the sexual activity of I don't know what the words were, vulnerability or the temptations. They didn't use temptations, that's too preachy. They used something like that. So this is after the war, and then this book comes out. things are really changing in the minds of men who have been all over the world, literally. And so this book comes out on January 5th, and the week later, Raintree County is published. And I've never read this book, but I understand I understand this book does reveal quite a bit of the topic of temptation. And sadly, by March, the author, Raintree County is published right after Kinsey writes his book. And so there's a lot of talk in this town about the topics of sex. And sadly, in March, Lockridge has committed suicide. He's got 4 kids.
His youngest son, Ross, a classmate of mine at Moss.
He was a classmate?
Yeah.
How old was he when he, in 1948, was he infant? 2 years old, yeah.
2 or 3 years.
Yeah. So Bloomington is dealing with all of that sensation, but then by March, Lockridge has died. So that's a very interesting, that could be a whole slideshow all itself, I suppose. Matthews Brothers is now in Chicago building the Research Institute building. They're in Pennsylvania building the industrial building at State College. 1948, IU professor Ralph Fuchs, F-U-C-H-S, and his wife Annetta are starting to meet with other folks who want to start the Unitarian Church in Bloomington. And by January, they get approval from the National American Unitarian Association. Just as a side note, so this is 1940. I talked about the other churches that are coming up after the war. In 1949, the Unitarians are established. In 1950, the Mormons, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, began meeting on Sundays at the American Legion. And I was just very intrigued by that. And I don't know, Keisters was, Kisters? I hear different things. Okay. I saw that he was born in Utah, and I wondered if he had any influence in opening up the American Legion. Okay. But the Mormons are meeting in the American Legion on Sundays when they were on South College. And also in 1950, the Shiloh Pentecostal Temple opens. And so some people may say this is a fragmentation of traditional denominations. Other people may say it's progress. But I think it's very interesting that after the war, you see a lot of openings, different churches and denominations in Bloomington. In 1949, this may seem trivial, but this is the things that I find interesting on the timeline. We may not think it was a big deal when Floyd Alcott came to Bloomington, but it was a big deal because he anchored himself fresh out of Butler University, comes to Bloomington, works at University Advertising Corporation. In 1961, Mayor Lemon appoints him at advertising to be in the Parks Board, where he serves for 14 years. He also, in 1970, he's on the Chamber of Commerce. In 1975, he's on the City Council. But he's coming to us in 1949 after the war. In 1949, in May, Radio Ralph dies. I think there's a lot more to this story. This is another fun thing about the timeline is that you read this and you're going, who was Radio Ralph? And why does everyone know him? Maybe because he worked at Showers and everyone worked at Showers. But the way that the newspaper describes his death, it's fascinating to me. He's only 50 years old, and he's well known and well loved. Of course, he works in the radio unit, and then he eventually has a repair shop at 500 North Grant Street, which I haven't looked up yet. The newspaper says that when his death was confirmed, by calling the hospital, the people lingered in little knots, speaking in soft voices about their friend. I just thought that was a very nice way to put it. 1949 in August, I have it down that 16 people are trapped and killed in the Greyhound bus, but the total is 17. I think one person died after they were transported to the hospital. This is the worst loss of life for our fire department. So this must have been just a horrible night for our fire crew and emergency people. This was near Dolan on Highway 37. And this photograph comes from a Herald Leader archive photo. It's not in part of the timeline. Just another reminder that we cannot use the photos outside of areas where we have clearance for copyright. So we have some restrictions on the photos we can use, but I put it in here. In 1949 November, Sarkis Tarzian obtains his television license and he begins broadcasting the WTTV. It is the second largest broadcast station in Indiana, but it is located in the smallest broadcasting community in the U.S. So again, Bloomington is just rocking with the talent. Anybody know who this is? It's Ruthie. In November of 1949, Ruthie Collier begins working at Nick's. She works there for 40 years. I think she would have some stories, don't you? Oh, this is a rare smile, apparently. She was a pretty tough cookie. I really would like to do some genealogical research on Ruthie because I've heard some comments about her. She could really... I think if you were a sweet college girl, wanted to be a waitress at Nick's, and you did not please her, I think you would go home crying. 1949, Matthews Brothers is building Boston University Chapel. And this is my last slide. And I did get it into an hour. Mike just thought it... This is a photo of Daisy Woodward and her husband, Frank Obeck. And in 1949, they established the Borrowed Time Club to provide hobby groups, community parties, and their own radio station for members of the community over 70, because that was really old back then, right? It is the first in Indiana. So this is the Borrowed Time Club, and this is the first one in Indiana and the first in the nation. And it's just a great photo. These are the folks who brought us to Beck Chapel. And so these are those academic types, right, that came to IU and wanted to improve us and bring us high cultured and elevate us it's but by this age, they are part of us, and what do they say? The gown has become the town at this point. So it was a wild ride through the 40s. So they're like, let's grow old with a radio station. Isn't that just terrific? So that's my presentation. If anyone wants to help us index the 40s, we would love to have you. If anyone wants to just read the timeline and tell me where all the typos are, I'd be thrilled. So thank you very much.